Today on CityCast Chicago, we talk about these power struggles all the time. I'm talking Johnson versus Pritzker, the council versus the mayor, CPS versus CTU, not to mention CTA, CHA, and a bunch of other acronyms. But let's talk about who actually has the most power in Chicago and who just seems like it in the media. It's Monday, January 13th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I'm here today with the Tribune's AD Quig. Welcome back to CityCast Chicago, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we've got WCIU TV host Brandon Pope in the building. Welcome back.
What's good? Happy to be here.
So I feel like a lot of people see these names, titles, institutions in the news, and it can be real easy to lose track or be like, who's really calling the shots, pulling the strings behind closed doors in the Chicagoland area. So we wanted to bring in a couple friends to break down some of these dynamics. So let's just jump in right at the top with our local executives. Names a lot of people listening are probably familiar with. That's Mayor Brandon Johnson, Cook County Board Press Tony Preckwinkle, and Governor J.B. Pritzker. Let's start here. Which position is theoretically the most powerful?
I think it depends on the year, but you know what I'm saying? Like right now, theoretically, it's the governor, I would say. But there's been some years, I'm sure, where, and you could argue that the Chicago mayor may have been the most powerful position because Chicago tends to dictate economically and culturally and socially and politically how the rest of the state goes. But the influence of the mayor's office this cycle is waning.
I'm going to agree this year for sure. It's the governor. And I have this top of mind because we just got through the city budget process. And so much of what the city wants right now is money from the state. So the person in charge of controlling those purse strings has a lot of power. It's always dependent kind of on who's doing better, quote unquote. Hypothetically, we could have a very unpopular governor that is still in control of the purse strings. But in this case, we have a pretty popular governor in control of the purse strings and who has also a lot of money to scatter around for political reasons. So I'm going to say governor this year.
This feels like a loaded question, but at one point between, let's say, 1977 and 2003, we had three Republican mayors, Governor Thompson, Governor Edgar, Governor Ryan. And so the relationship between mayor, Democratic mayor, Republican governor, you assume a lot more friction. Right now, the relationship between these three Democratic executives, Governor Pritzker, Tony Preckwinkle, Mayor Johnson, is it one of collaboration, on the same page, everyone sort of moving lockstep with each other? AD, you kind of shaking your head.
I mean, this week is quite the week to ask. Like, I can't believe we organized it for this week. No, we've got some dissension in the ranks. We have some Democrats in disarray at a very bad time for Democrats to be in disarray heading into a new Republican presidential era, especially with President Trump, who has a particular dislike for Illinois and Chicago in general. This week, we saw it happen with this hemp bill.
We talked about it on the pod on Friday.
Yeah. In previous months, it's been the migrant response. Even years ago, pre-Brandon Johnson, we had some disagreement about COVID response during Mayor Lori Lightfoot's time. So no, the Democrats don't always get along. And there are different pressure points for each, right? Like who has more power in what situation? In this situation, it's who has the power to convince more legislators of what the right thing is to do. And that changes based on issue. The one person you are not seeing talking smack about anybody else, at least out loud, is President Preckwinkle. Yeah. And as someone who has led the Cook County Democratic Party for a while and has been in politics for a long time, I think she is the most disciplined when it comes to not talking smack about other Democrats until you absolutely have to.
You see Governor J.B. Pritzker with the press conference he had kind of airing out the fifth floor of City Hall and the relationship there. And you have this back and forth over whether the two offices talk regularly or not. The Johnson camp saying, yeah, we talk all the time with the governor. And the governor said, nah, I don't ever hear from y'all. So
our staffs don't work as closely as you're alluding to. We're not on the same page.
This back and forth over communication, we even saw this happening when we had the migrant crisis with the county itself. There was meetings organized where they're like, okay, we're going to be in agreement on how we're going to fund all this, and then they leave it and say, well, we thought we had something, and whatever entity decided that's not what they wanted. So I do think when it comes to cohesion, it's really a tough time for that. I don't think that Cook County is necessarily a big sore spot when it comes to that, but it's definitely, the governor's office, City Hall, a lot of contention there.
Quig, you mentioned Toni Preckwinkle. I'd argue of the three is the most entrenched. I think at this point she's been board president so long, people forget that, she had been running for city council as far back as 1983. Right, was an alder for 20 years between 1991 and 2010. And so the question of who has the longest stay, who has the most connections, I think is easily Preckwinkle. But when we think about who actually holds the most sway over city life and city politics day to day, right, we'd say Governor Pritzker is theoretically the most powerful right now. President Preckwinkle has the most entrenched power. But does Johnson edge out the two when we talk about who holds the most sway day to day over city politics?
In title, yes. In practice, he's had a really difficult time bringing everyone along, despite his self-professed collaborator-in-chief moniker. We saw how rancorous this budget process was. So much stuff has happened this year. There's been so much dissension on so many issues. We're heading into another one with likely this sanctuary city debate, whether aldermen tried to ease back on our welcoming city status. The reason we thought of previous mayors as being so powerful is because they had so much control over so many levers. So usually they controlled the city council. Usually they controlled a pretty significant winning political apparatus. They had more control over
the school board for one. So some of the ways that the mayor traditionally held sway have gone away just technically, and then in practice by the mayor not being able to collaborate as much as he said he was going to be able to, and the city council just becoming more independent. It's not a complete grip anymore. But yes, he still has a ton of control over what direction the city goes, setting the budget in the first place, kind of setting the city's agenda and being the national face of the city of Chicago.
I think part of this conversation, too, when you think about who has the most power, how we define power, when I think of Toni Preckwinkle, I think of her tree of influence. I think of her mentorship tree, right? She comes from this, it's really wide spanning. I mean, Barack Obama's on it. Kim Foxx, who, just departed as state's attorney.
Lamont Robinson.
Former alderwoman Sophia King, Brandon Johnson. She has been a kingmaker for a large part of her career. It's an interesting relationship, but I would argue that Brandon Johnson doesn't get to the finish line to be mayor without that first significant establishment endorsement, and that was Toni with Cook County's as Cook County president. So I mean, she has this sway. She's had some losses recently. I mean, she's endorsed Bring Chicago Home. Anything Brandon's done, she's kind of been on his side, and it hasn't really gone that way. But she's got little hooks everywhere, and if she at any moment wanted to be in disagreement with Brandon Johnson in the fifth floor, I believe she could go into city council herself and whip votes and get people around her way, because she's been an alderman herself and understands the fifth floor very well.
I appreciate the way Toni Preckwinkle has flexed it over city mayors in terms of, she was like, oh, we're going to do a guaranteed income pilot. Well, we're going to do a bigger one. Oh, you guys are having a tough time getting your budget passed smoothly. We're going to do ours pretty easily. Oh, you all are considering raising property taxes. I'm going to chill out on it, right? So she has found ways to stay away from the most maybe dissension heavy topics, particularly over the last year and a half. This entire time we've talked about, the mayor's spectrum of power in relationship to the city council and its 50 alder people. Each alder obviously has a lot of sway in their wards, but the council itself also passes legislation, and certain alders have more sway as a whole. The council is big enough that we obviously have some pretty prominent caucuses. At this time, do we have a sense of maybe which caucus or which grouping of alders has the most control right now?
I struggled with this question because we have had so many kind of shifting alliances, which really got highlighted in the budget process, like you said. Ordinarily, we would say we have a progressive mayor, so the most important caucus is the Progressive Caucus. But the Progressive Caucus is not united right now. We saw some Progressive Caucus members seriously come out against the mayor and the way that he went about this year's budget. We've seen them disagree on, major policy rollouts. And progressives, as we know, are not afraid to criticize each other like out in the open for all of us to see. I think the Black Caucus has always had a tremendous amount of power and sway, and they have been pretty united on many issues and have become kind of one of the caucuses that the mayor always wants to have on his or her side for a variety of reasons. They still have a pretty hefty amount of votes, like straight up.
The conversations like ShotSpotter show that.
Exactly. So we can see how when the Black Caucus does band together to do things, they can get them done. I still think the Progressive Caucus has a tremendous amount of sway. I think they're the people that the mayor listens to. I think they're the people who are very savvy in terms of communication. They're like pretty hooked in with their communities. I don't know. Brennan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm actually in lockstep with you. I've had pretty much the same exact answer. It's hard to really say that one is really strong right now because we've seen them all sway around on different issues and unite in different ways where I'm like, Napolitano's reuniting with, progressives on this and vice versa. But the Black Caucus for sure, traditionally, is the most powerful. I think a lot of people coming in expected this big progressive wave, and we're seeing, alders like Vasquez and Maria Hadden even take issue with some of Mayor Brandon Johnson's proposals and the way he goes about things and calling them out directly on the city council floor.
So Vasquez literally will pull up in a costume, like wearing an elephant costume on Halloween.
As the elephant in the room, yeah.
On the floor.
The CTA Ghost, that was a good one.
I mean, traditionally in Chicago, some alders just have more sway, have more name recognition. In this current council where there are, relatively speaking, in the last few elections, a ton of newer council members. Are there one or two who sit there as the most powerful alders on the city council who have a ton of sway that people are constantly going to and checking in with in this day and age, Pope?
Yeah, I still think Pat Dowell has a large amount of influence. I mean, she runs the most powerful committee in finance, the largest budget of any committee in finance. And just anytime you talk to anyone about Pat Dowell, or if you have experience talking to Pat Dowell, you just know she's extremely well researched and detailed on everything involving city council.
Third ward alder going into her 18th year.
Exactly. And there's no document that comes through there that she does not comb through aggressively. So I think she's got great respect within the council. And I think that her opinion holds a lot of sway within the council, especially you take into account how long she's been serving as well. I think she's a big timer when it comes to this conversation. There's some others, but I think of her right away.
I agree. She was top of my list. So is Jason Irvin at this point because he's the head of the budget committee, also very powerful.
Who is the alderperson in the 28th ward.
Former head of the Black Caucus that some people still treat as the head of the Black Caucus. And he's basically, after this budget, the mayor's de facto floor leader. So he's like one of the people going around and talking to everyone all the time. And being that kind of node for communications can be like a big source of power. Part of a power couple, we could argue. His wife is the city treasurer. They are continuing to try to build kind of a big, powerful political organization on the city's west side. So he's kind of got like a multi-pronged power approach here, aside from just like the title of running the budget committee.
The other names that people will see a lot in the news are the heads of city agencies and city departments. These heads are all appointed by the mayor, but there's a difference. You have agencies like the CTA, Chicago Public Schools, the Chicago Housing Authority. They have their own governing bodies, their own budgets. And then you have city departments like public health, police, streets and sand that are funded. Which city agency head has the most power and influence currently? I mean, these are typically leaders who are often criticized. CHA just had their lead step down. CTA's lead is constantly being like pushed to step down. Chicago Public Schools has a sort of, in the interim, we'll see what happens over the next 6 months before you get up out of here, leader. So I know that maybe I've spoiled it with all of that setup, but
I'm going to give like a semi-controversial answer, because I still think, even though he has been fired, that CPS CEO Pedro Martinez has such a command on the news cycle and so many people listening so intently to what he wants and thinks that he's leading here. I could argue also that Dorval Carter, just from pure staying power,
that he has a briefcase full of I got yous on everybody.
Yeah. Part of the problem of what I've heard over and over is the explanation for why he has not been replaced is that there are so few people.
Hard to replace. Yeah.
That is very hard to replace, which is like also a very powerful place to be.
A lot of leverage.
Yeah. It's like, I'm pretty indispensable. Try me.
Me and AD are in lockstep, it seems like, because I was thinking the same thing. It's not controversial. I think if Pedro Martinez right now said, I'm running for mayor of Chicago, he would get a wave of support just off of grievance and frustration with how the whole CPS and CTU thing has unfolded. They're all embattled at this point, right? Yeah. I don't think you could say any's popular.
We could say Rose Escareno is just kind of chilling at Parks. Just having a nice time.
Yeah, underrated. Just under the radar.
I mean, now under the radar. A couple of years ago, it was a lot was going on over at Parks.
Yeah, that's true. But she's another person who's like kind of like Tony Preckwinkle, Pat Dowell. They've just been in and out of city departments and city life for so long that they probably know where a ton of bodies are buried. They know they know who to call in certain situations. So I think in that sense, like, she is also powerful. She's got staying power and tenure and names and experience because she's been floating around the city generally for a very long time.
No, for sure. I think we've all said it at some point or another, but I think Dorval Carter's ability to sit in front of city council with, like, at times very much, I don't know why I'm here. You all don't understand my job, don't know what I'm dealing with, and barely crack the surface when we talk about like ridership numbers in the COVID era. Like, that level of certainty that you are not going to fire me or get rid of me, I think gives him so much leverage, because at least Pedro, for the most part, up until the last couple of months, he was very much like just kind of chilling. He was like, hey, I'm trying. I'm doing my best. I'm going to work with you to go down to ask Pritzker and to stay for more money. And then they was like, hey, we want your job. Right now it's op-eds and things like that. But I feel like Dorval Carter for the last few years has just been like, come on, get rid of me. Go ahead. Get rid of me right now. Do it. I dare you.
I triple dare you.
Right?
That's the job security I aspire to.
Come on. What about when we think about city departments, public health, streets and sand, police? I'll start us off here. I think similar in the argument to like Pedro Martinez kind of control of the media cycle. I think the influence that Chicago Police Department has over city council, over the conversation of the city budget, over the conversation of Chicago's public safety strategy. I think how handcuffed, no pun intended, mayors have been when it comes to, the type of money that is required to set aside in our city budget for things like lawsuits. I think it just makes clear how much influence the police department has, and in many ways how other departments' budget and influence has come at the expense of how loud the police department, their union, have been.
Yeah, they get whatever they want. except for maybe ShotSpotter. So I can understand that argument completely. That's probably who I would say the police department. You could say the health department. If it was 2020, 2021, they held extreme influence. I mean, on our daily life and how we operated within the city. But yeah, I'd say usually by default, the police, that massive budget, it's always increasing.
I'd argue 2021 was probably the window you had to wrangle in the budget with the least amount of contention to take some more progressive swipes at the way the police department is ran. I think they've sort of reconstituted their influence and their control over the conversation in the years since.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Larry Snelling is very popular, which is really a really difficult thing to be as the head of the Chicago Police Department. But he seems well-liked by the mayor, which isn't always true, well-liked by the council, which isn't always true, and more or less liked by the community. We're not seeing protests in the streets about his leadership. Something that I thought might put that more at risk, but hasn't, is the slow pace of consent decree compliance. But other than that, it's like cruising along, which feels so rare for the head of the Chicago Police Department over the past decade. We've seen so much turnover and so many crises.
Yeah, Snelling's a guy, he was visible when he was a police officer. He was a guy I knew when he was a police officer. He was when you talk about community policing, people on the South Side, they knew Officer Snelling very well. They saw him as a friendly face. And I think he's maintained that kind of same presence and feeling for a lot of people throughout the South and West Side. I'm sure there's going to be things that people may disagree with him on some issues, but yeah, he's a surprisingly and uniquely popular police chief for sure.
No, I think surprising given there have been these instances over the last year. Again, whether we think about, new arrivals sleeping on police floors, we think about how protests were handled on campuses when we saw a wave of pro-Palestinian support. It feels like there were tons of opportunity, the ShotSpotter conversation for increased criticism. And when it did not come, I think like you all, I was like, oh, I know there are some people listening to this conversation are like, all right, I know a bunch of these names, but like, who are the underrated power players in Chicago politics?
If you want an underrated one, I would say Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. Mostly because he's not a huge splashy name, but his presence, influence, and pocketbook is larger than probably his name recognition is. And he's built himself a pretty deep war chest that when Senator Dick Durbin decides he's going to hang it up, which he said will be, I believe,
2026, potentially,
right? He's poised to take up that seat if he want. He's got the money to spend, but he's also a guy who he's active in hearings. He's active in the northern suburbs. He's active in the city. I think he's slept on for sure. Absolutely. If we're talking about underrated power players.
You got one for us, AD?
We mentioned them before, and maybe I'm biased because I kind of like called this out very early in her tenure. But Maria Hadden at the Chicago City Council is an expert in conflict resolution. And I think a lot of other council members kind of consider her one of the major consciences of the council. Like, she's very good at explaining why certain people feel the way they do, why she feels the way she does, what she agrees with and disagrees with, and what needs to happen to fix things going forward. So she's like one of the great council communicators, even though she's not running anything directly. That's one. I will always say Bob Reiter, the head of the Chicago Federation of Labor. He's got his finger on the pulse of so many different labor issues. I think he often is a convener for politicians, and during times of labor strife, he's kind of the guy who tries to go in and fix things. And when you think of all the different labor organizations we have and how different their politics are, he's in a really interesting position. Like, we know trade labor is more conservative than the Chicago Teachers Union, for example. So he's got his fingers in a lot of different pots, but isn't always right up front and in the headlines.
I'm surprised we haven't even brought up yet Alderman Walter Burnett,
Yeah.
vice mayor, the dean of city council, and he's been the alderman of the 27th ward for a while now, 30 years? He's overseen 2 DNCs now in his ward. You see this guy move around Soho House. I'll tell you what, you see the influence.
Well, that ward is so interesting. You've got the super wealthy east side, the west side that he's made his life's work to lift up and help people out. It's like a very powerful ward to begin with.
I mean, he was one of the people daily put in front of the community when it was a far gone decision to tear down Cabrini Green. He was one of the people that he put in front of those community meetings to say, hey, I lived here. It's time to move towards something different. And so, I'm mentioning that in a more controversial take, but I also think it speaks to how long he's been here, right? Like you said, Pope, the alder since 95. Has a casino going up in his ward as we speak. And so, and probably one of the largest proponents of bus stop ads in the city of Chicago. Burnett and Top Dog Law.
They everywhere.
They bus stopped up out here. Do you think a person like, a Stacey Davis Gates, is that someone whose power is, I don't want to say overblown in the sense that she doesn't have any, but is more of a person who the media likes to saddle and pick on? Because you read any number of headlines. Does she have more power than leads on, or is that just a media narrative?
Well, there's definitely this Lady Macbeth narrative out there when it comes to Stacey Davis Gates. And when you talk to Stacey Davis Gates, she pushes back on it heavily, and says that that's not the case at all. And the argument she makes is that if she was running city council or city hall, 5th floor, there'd be a contract by now. Which, I mean, I sort of get where she's coming from there. You can't deny, though, that this is a unique situation and that she has more access to the 5th floor than CTU ever has, really. So she's powerful for sure. I do think it may get overblown, this idea that she is, the puppeteer of Mayor Brandon Johnson and, what she says goes. But you can't deny she's got some power because she has a direct line to him.
I think one other name that people are not familiar with, but it's probably has a lot of shadow power, a lot of puppeteering power. Richard and Elizabeth Uihlein, Dick Uihlein, Illinois, one of Illinois' most prominent Republican donors. I think I read an article, he has donated close to $100 million over the last few decades. And so has had a lot of money in not only Trump's reelection campaign, I think, but also a lot of those school board candidate texts and messages we were getting. You trace that money back to donors like Uihlein. And so I think at a time in which I think we'll face increased pressure from conservative candidates at every level of government. I think donors like Uihlein will continue to showcase their power both in front and behind closed doors.
Yeah, and we shouldn't underestimate, I'm overly focused on hyperlocal things, and Dick Uihlein is nationally powerful in terms of how much money he can throw out and just in terms of the size and scope of their business. He just runs a really big, successful business, and that brings power with it too.
We've got a bunch of people we could have mentioned in this conversation. Maybe we'll come back to it. But if you're listening and you got some names you want to throw into the ring, please let us know at 773-780-0246. Leave us a text or a voicemail, your name, your neighborhood, and your power ranking. I want to give another huge thank you to our guest today from the Tribune, AD Quig. Always a good time.
Thank you so much.
And WCIU TV host Brandon Pope, we appreciate you joining, my friend.
Happy to be here. Go Buckeyes.
Before we get out of here, please bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you can catch up on all of our latest articles, which we're updating almost every single day. You can subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, check in on our neighborhood and walking guides, and so much more. Of course, I can't let you go without some good news. Chicagoans have until Wednesday to apply for the city's Individual Artist Grant Program. The program is run by the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. You may know them as DCASE, and artists can get up to $6,000 to support their local work. Please, if you're an artist, don't miss out on this opportunity. The money can be used for everything from putting up a production, getting a production you already have, more promo, new equipment. Please visit the link in our show notes and learn more now. Again, the deadline is Wednesday. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. Share us with your friends and family, and most importantly, be back here either bright and early tomorrow or whenever the next time you're going to listen to us. We'll be here waiting. I'll talk to you then. Peace.